Surreal news. Take a deep breath, because what happened deserves a real, honest talk. You know when everything seems to be lining up for one of those historic days? When the team shows up with authority, silences the rival stadium, and the sea of green in the stands looks like it owns the place? Yeah, it felt like it was going to be one of those. It really did. But then, out of nowhere, the script flipped into a nightmare we'd rather not even picture again. A sharp, unbelievable collapse that turned a flawless start into one of the most painful turnarounds we've ever witnessed. And that's exactly why what happened in Dallas isn't just another loss. It's a warning flare. It's a reminder that even the most explosive start means nothing if the same issues that have haunted this team all season keep showing up. And from the moment Philadelphia built that 21-0 advantage, those issues didn't just show up, they took over the entire game. The opening stretch looked like everything fans had been begging to see. Jalen Hurts was locked in, slicing up Dallas secondary with layered throws to A.J. Brown. DeVonta Smith adjusting midair on that deep shot. The offense marching as if the script had finally clicked. And the defense responded with a fourth down stop, followed by Reed Blankenship's interception at the goal line that felt like the exclamation point to a dream start. 3 touchdowns, 2 forced turnovers, all of it unfolding so quickly that you could practically hear AT&T Stadium crack under the pressure. But the moment the score hit 21-0, something shifted, subtly at first, then violently. The offense didn't just slow down, it fell into a complete freeze. 5 straight empty possessions, no points for the final 41 minutes. And instead of seeing the Eagles press their advantage, we saw penalties derail drive after drive. 14 flags for 96 yards, nearly a full football field of self-inflicted damage. Negative momentum stacking on negative momentum. What makes this collapse sting even more is that the defense, while giving up explosive plays, still handed the offense multiple golden chances to recover. A fumbled punt, a forced turnover, a missed Dallas field goal, and every single time, the offense answered with nothing: stalled drives, procedural mistakes, costly miscues, and a missed field goal that should have extended the lead at a critical moment. And yes, Jalen Hurts played winning football. 3 total touchdowns, nearly 300 yards through the air, smart decisions, accurate throws, and poise even as the offense around him unraveled. Yes, A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith did their jobs. The stars showed up, but football is the ultimate everybody-together sport, and the penalties alone prove just how far this team still is from functioning as a complete unit. Whether it was an illegal hands to the face wiping out a red zone opportunity, or a procedural penalty erasing a perfectly executed play to Dallas Goedert, the Eagles repeatedly erased their own progress. Then you look at the trenches, the place where Philadelphia has traditionally won games, and the picture becomes even clearer. The interior offensive line simply couldn't hold up. No push in the run game, constant pressure up the middle, Saquon Barkley battling just to reach the line of scrimmage on most carries. And every one of those breakdowns set off a domino effect that made long-developing plays harder, forced the offense into disadvantageous down and distance situations, and put even more strain on a unit that was already losing rhythm. Meanwhile, Dallas didn't hand anything back. They adjusted, they attacked the weakest parts of the defense, and they hit on explosive plays, long shots downfield, chunk gains after the catch, and enough sustained drives to chip away at what once looked like an insurmountable lead. Nearly 500 yards of total offense, more than 9 yards per pass, 7 yards per play overall. And in a game where the Eagles needed anyone, to step up and halt the bleeding, no one delivered the knockout punch needed to regain control. And that's why this loss cuts so deeply, because the game wasn't decided by a lack of talent, or injuries, or an impossible matchup. It was decided by discipline, by execution, by the details that championship teams master and struggling teams ignore. Nick Sirianni preaches tough, detailed, together, but nothing about this performance reflected that mantra. Not when the procedural mistakes pile up, not when penalties erase momentum over and over, not when the coaching staff goes conservative with a lead and doesn't have an answer once the game tightens. This is the kind of loss that forces a locker room to look in the mirror. It forces coaches to reevaluate decision-making. It forces players to confront the reality that talent can only take you so far when the details are broken. And with the playoff picture tightening, the schedule accelerating, and the margin for error shrinking fast, this moment could become a fork in the road for the entire season. So now the question is simple. After blowing a 21-point lead against your biggest rival, with penalties, execution errors, and missed opportunities defining the collapse, what do you think this loss says about where the Eagles truly stand right now? Picking up exactly where we left off, because the second half of this story isn't about reliving the collapse, it's about what it reveals, and what it demands from this team moving forward. because when a loss like that happens, especially after a 21-0 start, it forces every layer of the organization to confront uncomfortable truths. And those truths didn't just appear against Dallas, they've been simmering all season, and this game ripped the lid off completely. The most glaring issue is discipline, or the complete lack of it. 14 penalties don't happen by accident. They don't happen because the opponent played well. They happen because something in the preparation, communication, or standards isn't where it needs to be. The procedural mistakes alone, false starts, illegal hands, alignment errors, are the kind of problems you see in teams still trying to figure out who they are, not in a roster loaded with veterans who've been in big moments before. And when those penalties come in situations that wipe out explosive plays or erase scoring opportunities, they become more than numbers on a stat sheet. They become momentum killers. And momentum is everything in the NFL, especially on the road. You could feel the entire tempo of the game shift once those mistakes began hitting in rapid succession. Drives that should have ended with points turned into punts. Red zone chances turned into missed field goals. Big gains by DeVonta Smith and Dallas Goedert got wiped out like they never existed. And each setback created another layer of pressure that the offense never seemed willing to fight their way out of once they lost their rhythm. But the penalties are just one side of the problem. The coaching approach is the other. Because going conservative with a 21-point lead isn't just a tactical decision, it sends a message to the locker room. It tells players that the priority is protecting the lead instead of expanding it. It invites the opponent to climb back into the fight. And once Dallas seized that opening, the Eagles never looked like a team prepared to respond with the same aggression they opened the game with. The most frustrating part is that Jalen Hurts gave them every chance to stay alive. His numbers weren't inflated, they were meaningful. His decision-making was sharp. His leadership showed in tough pockets, tight window throws, and extending plays when everything around him tightened. A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith did their jobs. The passing game was there, but when the pocket collapses too quickly, when the run game offers no balance because the interior offensive line gets bullied, and when execution crumbles on the margins, even a great quarterback can only cover up so much. And that brings us to the trenches, where the story of this game, and honestly, this season, keeps repeating. The interior offensive line simply isn't playing at a level that gives this offense the physical identity it needs. Injuries matter, but this goes beyond health. It speaks to consistency, conditioning, communication, and accountability. When you can't open running lanes, the playbook shrinks. When you can't protect the A-gaps, the quarterback's timing collapses. And when the fundamentals break down up front, every other part of the offense begins to crack with it. On the defensive side, the effort was there, but the injuries and explosive plays became too much to overcome. No defense is built to survive repeated deep shots, constant short fields, and the mental exhaustion of watching your own offense sputter after starting at full speed. Asking them, once again, to save the game is unsustainable. And this time, they simply couldn't bail the team out. So what does all of this leave us with? A team overflowing with talent but fighting itself at every critical moment. A team that can dominate for a quarter but disappear for an entire half. A team that can look like a contender for 15 minutes and a pretender for the next 45. A team that needs a reset, not in roster, but in execution, discipline, and identity. Because the truth is simple, seasons are not defined by what happens when everything goes right. They're defined by how teams respond when everything unravels. And right now, the Eagles are entering a stretch where excuses won't matter, talent won't be enough, and the details will determine whether this season becomes a comeback story or a collapse that spiraled into something worse. So now I'll leave it with you. After witnessing a 21-point lead vanish, after watching penalties, coaching decisions, and execution issues pile up, and with the toughest stretch of the season arriving fast, do you believe this team can correct its problems in time to salvage the year? And this is where the season truly sharpens into focus, because everything that comes next will hinge on how this team responds to the reality it created. Not the scoreboard, not the highlight plays, not the first quarter fireworks. The reality. A reality in which the Eagles have shown they can explode, but also implode. They can dominate, but also disappear. And that duality is exactly what turns a moment like this into a crossroads rather than just a bad afternoon. The locker room knows it. You can sense it in the way the veterans talk about execution. You can see it in the way the younger players react to mistakes. The confidence is still there, nobody is panicking, but the margin for error has shrunk to nearly nothing. One more performance defined by penalties, missed opportunities, and conservative decisions at the wrong time, and the season's trajectory shifts from contender fighting for seeding to team trying to keep control of its own destiny. The coaching staff is now under just as much pressure as the players, because the message from the sidelines has to match the urgency of the situation. This team can't afford to play scared with a lead or cautious in key moments. They've proven they can design explosive drives and attack aggressively when they choose to. The question is whether they're willing to maintain that identity when the game tightens, when the opponent punches back, and when the pressure mounts. Championship teams press forward. Teams still searching for themselves retreat. And right now, the Eagles need to show which side they want to be on. The players know it too. Jalen Hurts can shoulder the offense, but he can't block penalties out of existence or create running lanes by force of will. A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith can dominate matchups, but their production means nothing when big gains are wiped out by mistakes far removed from the football. And the defense, no matter how much they fight, can't be the safety net every week when the offense goes quiet for entire halves. This has to become a collaborative fix, not a weekly cycle of one unit carrying the other until it breaks. And that's what makes the upcoming stretch so defining. It's not about finding new plays or new personnel. It's about the details, eliminating the sloppy mistakes, reestablishing rhythm up front, regaining confidence in the run game, staying aggressive when momentum is theirs, and trusting each other enough to play with the same energy they showed in the first quarter against Dallas, not the hesitant, fragmented version that followed. Because if they can reclaim that identity, they still have everything to play for. The talent is here. The leadership is here. The experience is here. But talent without discipline is chaos, and leadership without execution is noise. This is the moment where the season demands clarity, and every player, every coach, every unit has to decide whether they're willing to correct the problems that have been staring them in the face for weeks. And if they don't, well, then the collapse in Dallas won't be remembered as an isolated choke. It will be remembered as the first domino that tipped the entire season into freefall. But if they do respond, if they clean it up, if they sharpen the details, if they attack instead of hesitate, then this loss becomes the turning point, not the breaking point. The moment the team stops flirting with inconsistency and starts playing like the group fans know they can be. Now it's your turn, because this is where I want Eagles fans to weigh in. After everything we've just broken down, after seeing how this team can soar and stumble in the same game, what changes do you believe must happen immediately, on the field or on the sidelines, for this season to get back on track? Let me know in the comments, smash that like button to support the channel, hit subscribe so you don't miss the breakdowns coming this week, and keep an eye on the screen. There's another video waiting for you right now. And if we're being honest, this isn't just about fixing mistakes on a whiteboard or tightening up technique in practice. It's about identity. Every great Eagles team in recent years carried a certain edge, a certain fearlessness that showed up in the biggest moments. What fans watched in that collapse wasn't a lack of talent, it was a lack of that edge. And that's what must be rediscovered now, because when you blow a 21-0 lead, it's not simply a bad day. It exposes how thin the margin truly is. It shows how quickly momentum can flip when attention to detail fades. And the Eagles have reached the point in the season where every snap matters, every penalty matters, every third down matters. These aren't lessons you want to learn in November, but they're lessons you must correct in November if you expect to still matter in January. One thing that can't be ignored is how the locker room reacts from here. Veteran leaders have lived through adversity before, but young players experiencing this kind of collapse for the first time will look to see who stands tall and who crumbles. This is where accountability becomes more than a buzzword. It means calling out sloppy play in film sessions. It means correcting communication between the quarterback and the offensive line. It means fixing procedural penalties that have become far too common. And most importantly, it means understanding that no opponent is going to hand the Eagles anything from this point on. You can already feel the microscope tightening around the coaching staff. Adjustments have to come faster. Decisions have to reflect urgency. If the offense sputters, you can't just hope it wakes up. You have to force it awake. If a unit is struggling, you can't wait a quarter to address it. You fix it right there, on the field, in real time. Because the NFL doesn't wait for anyone, and playoff races definitely don't. There's also the mental test that follows a loss like this. You can't let it linger. You can't let it become the defining chapter of the season. But you do have to let it sharpen you. Losing like that hurts because it should. It stings because it matters. And how a team channels that frustration, whether it becomes fuel or becomes a fracture, will reveal everything about its DNA. The truth is that the Eagles still control their path. They still have the roster to right the ship. They still have playmakers capable of flipping games instantly. They still have leaders who know what it takes to push through adversity. But none of that will matter if the discipline doesn't tighten, if the offensive line doesn't find stability, and if the coaching doesn't match the urgency that the moment demands. Because the season is approaching its defining stretch, and this team is standing at the edge of two possible futures. One where the Dallas collapse becomes a wake-up call that fixes everything, or one where it becomes the moment fans look back on and say, That's when it all started to fall apart. And now we hand it off to you, because the pulse of this fan base has always mattered. What changes do you believe absolutely must happen this week to make sure this team doesn't repeat the same mistakes when they step on the field again? And the truth is, every great season has a moment like this, a moment that forces players, coaches, and fans to face the uncomfortable reality of where the team truly stands. For some teams, that moment breaks them. For others, it becomes the spark that brings everyone back to the standard. The Eagles are now standing right at that dividing line, because blowing a 21-0 lead isn't something you can brush aside or chalk up to a bad break. It exposes habits. It exposes preparation. It exposes what happens when urgency fades. And if this team is going to stabilize its season, it has to start by embracing the fact that there is no more room for distractions, no more room for sloppiness, and no more room for assuming things will fix themselves just because the roster is talented. Players have talked all year about execution being the real problem, not scheme. That's been the message from the locker room every time the offense has sputtered. But words mean nothing if they're not matched by discipline on the field. And right now, every player has to treat every rep like it determines the outcome of the season, because it might. And then there's the emotional weight of this loss. Even the most mentally tough players feel it. Nobody walks away from a collapse like that untouched. But the key is how they process it. Do they carry the frustration onto the field next week as a burden? Or do they carry it as fuel? Do they respond like a team embarrassed? Or like a team awakened? Because fans felt the shift. Everyone watching could see the difference between the first quarter and everything that followed. That can't happen again. Not with the schedule tightening. Not with playoff positioning on the line. Not with momentum hanging in the balance. This has to be the moment where the Eagles take control back. Not just physically, but mentally. And let's make this absolutely clear. The fix doesn't require magic. It requires commitment. Commitment to discipline. Commitment to communication. Commitment to playing with the same confidence from whistle to whistle, not just until something goes wrong. Commitment to not letting one mistake turn into 3. Commitment to playing 4 quarters with the